should forfeit the number 1 seed, and all sorts of other things you guys had to ask me. Let's talk some Chiefs. Welcome to the RGR Football Channel. I am Seth Kaiser, the Chief in the North. It's good to be back. I was gone last week. I was in trial, unfortunately, which is actually an affliction that's going to be hitting me. That's right. We're calling being in trial an affliction now. It's going to be hitting me next week as well on Wednesday, and we'll see whether or not I'm going to be able to do this. What we try to do every week, I take your mailbag questions either from the previous week here or from Twitter when I post a tweet asking for some mailbag questions. We actually did a mailbag on the Chief of the North newsletter earlier this week, and you maniacs had like 300 questions. So I'm still sifting through those and answering them. You guys had some really great questions this week. There's obviously a lot to talk about. There's a lot that's gone on in the NFL over the last few days since the last time we recorded together. Keep in mind, if you've got any questions for next week, make sure if you want, you put them in the comment section below, not the live stream section, but the comment section below. It's a little easier to sift through. Or look on my Twitter feed at RealMNChiefsFan on Wednesdays. I'll put out a tweet asking for mailbag questions, and that's how you can find them here. There's a lot to go through, and I tried to figure out how to best do this, whether or not to talk about Monday night and some of the ramifications of it right out of the gate, or just answer questions. It's Thursday now. And everyone has put forth an opinion on what happened with Damar Hamlin on Monday Night Football, the game being stopped. Obviously, a young man essentially going into cardiac arrest on the field. Genuinely chilling stuff to watch. Sounds like he's making signs of improvement based on the most recent reports, which is terrific to hear. And I've thought a lot about that because on one hand, if you don't talk about it at all, you can almost take away from the importance of something. On the other hand, there's a real danger when something of great import does happen. We have a tendency as people to kind of make it about ourselves. And, well, it's about my opinion on the subject. And so I thought a lot about that. And I'm going to mostly be talking about, based on some of the questions that you guys had, playoff implications and that sort of thing in terms of what they might do with the game, what they might not do. As I sit here recording this right now, it seems like the most likely course of action is they're not going to replay the game and that they will rest on win percentage, which puts the Chiefs in a certain position, of course. In terms of what happened, there's nothing that I would have to say that hasn't been said more and better by everyone. You see these types of things happen in sports at multiple levels, rarely like this. But never like this. And it's always such a strange thing to see real life kind of interpose itself onto a place that we usually go to escape, somewhere that we go for entertainment. And I think that's why that is so jarring, in addition to the obvious of watching someone collapse like that. So I've helped with as a chaplain. I've helped a little bit with death notifications. As a pastor, I've helped a little bit with funerals and that sort of thing. And it's never, no matter what the setting is, it's never an easy thing when we're reminded how short life is and how fragile it really is and how temporary all this can be. And so that's really all I have to say on the whole thing and the life stuff, the bigger issue stuff. Is just really, life is short. Be nice. Hug someone. Pray a little. There's a lot of things that you can do. But in the meantime, some of the things that we do for fun, like football, it's amazing how life does continue to move on even after something terrible happens, whether it's on a football field or whether it's a wonderful, wonderful woman from my church passed away last week. And life goes on. You mourn, you pray, and then You go to work the next day and you do. It's just fascinating to try to juxtapose those things of treating something with its proper import and understanding that the day-to-day continues. It's a weird thing, and I think that's why so many people feel so weird about it. So I said I wouldn't talk about it much, and now I've rambled on for several minutes. No idea if any of that's helpful to you. I have no idea at all, but I hope it is. In the meantime, we've got a mailbag to do, and I'm going to answer your Chiefs questions. And as we continue to think about, pray about a young man who's battling, we also start to do the day-to-day. With that in mind, I'm going to start answering some of your mailbag questions. And the very first one I actually thought was funny. It was the Michael Scott gif. It was, why are you the way that you are? I don't really have a good excuse. I was raised right. And I'm going to blame my wife, frankly. That seems like the right route to go at this point. Because, my parents did a great job with me. So the only explanation would be that it all went downhill. I'm kidding, of course. I'm just the way that I am because I'm just incorrigible. I'm unchangeable. I can't help myself. So Chris Blevins, starting off with some of the mailbag questions. Would you be bringing back Marquez Valdez-Scantling, or would you cut bait this offseason while you can? Well, one thing that I would note with MVS's contract, so next year it's about an $11 million hit. They can save 7 of that. And then the following year, it's a larger hit, but it's also easier to get rid of. It's also easier to cut loose from. So pulling up his spot track numbers now, it's definitely going to work for me now that I'm doing this. So next year's $11 million cap hit with $4 million in dead cap, which means you can save $7 million. The next year it's a $14 million cap hit with $2 million of dead cap, which means you can save $12 million by moving on that year. Here's what I would say with Valdez-Scantling. People have kind of treated it like maybe a foregone conclusion, like the Chiefs might move on this year. I don't think they do. I think they definitely keep him around for 2023. The reason for that being he does have a particular skill set that they need. He is their proven deep ball guy. He can get open. He's shown that repeatedly. And the fact that he and Mahomes have failed to connect a few times, in my opinion, has really altered fans' feelings on him. There's probably about 6 to 8 big plays this year that have been left on the table because of throws that Mahomes, you don't want to say should have hit, because these long balls down the field, they're a harder pass to hit, but he should have hit at least half of them. And that's actually, as you're watching this, the week 17 Patrick Mahomes film review should be up. I actually wrote about that a little bit in terms of what was going on with Mahomes in terms of some of his accuracy. He struggled with that against the Broncos in very specific times. He also went through stretches where he threw like 12 accurate passes in a row. And then he just had some real struggles in the third quarter, especially. And so we'll talk about that. But I would say Valdez-Scantling has shown he's a useful player in that regard. And that's a big deal. That having that particular skill set matters. And he also has shown he can do a few other things. Now, is he a number 1 receiver in any offense? No. Is he a number 2 receiver? Ideally, probably not. He's more of a niche third receiver and deep threat. And if the Chiefs really like Juju, and if either Tony or Sky Moore work out, that's all they need him to be. And then the question becomes, well, but at what cost? Because you're going to pay $11 million for a third receiver. In today's NFL, maybe, because you got to remember right now the going rate for a good receiver, a probably number 1, but maybe like an average-ish number 1 guy, that price is $20 million a year right now. And that's what's going to be interesting about Juju Smith-Schuster, to see what kind of price he draws on the open market. I think he was on his way to getting that kind of price, and then injuries, and it's been a little slower for him since he's returned. So that'll be interesting, and I think the playoffs are largely going to dictate that. The thing about paying MVS $11 million next year is that because you have Sky Moore, because you have Kadarius Toney, both on rookie deals, you can do that for 1 more year, and then you can kind of figure out what you want to do with that third year. So that's what I would do if I were the Chiefs. Oh, just before I forget, be sure, if you appreciate content like this or any of the content on RGR Football, make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, comment down below with mailbag stuff. It matters more than you think in terms of how much power you have in terms of supporting good work. And Ryan and Dan and Gary and all the guys here, they really do an exceptional job. So make sure you do that. In fact, do that right now. Pause it and do that. Did you do it? Okay, I'm going to stop being obnoxious. Let's move on to the next question here. In the event the Chiefs, this is from Jiffy, in the event the Chiefs move to a 34 front next year, which Chiefs players on this roster would fit in well in that scheme and which ones wouldn't? The interesting thing, because they play much more nickel than anything else, and because the fact that they currently play when they are in base, well, it varies a lot. There's a lot of variations of a 4-3 defense and a 3-4 defense, and for some of them, the role of certain guys, like the Sam linebacker in a 43 under, has a very similar role a lot of the times to what you might get with the weak side or the strong side outside linebacker in a 34. Not the weak side, the strong side. So there's going to be some overlap there. And honestly, when you look at the personnel that the Chiefs have, there's not any guy that I would say would have no place in a 34 defense. Especially because you're talking base defense, you're talking a quarter of your snaps at most. And so at this point, that matters, but not that much. It's just not nearly as big a deal as I think fans think it is. You do one thing that I don't know they necessarily have right now would be a true 5 technique to play a 34 defensive end, a guy that his job is going to be primarily to take on tackles, be strong against the run, try to eat double teams. Maybe a guy that, if he put on just a couple more pounds, you might think Mike Dana, because he looks a little better, more inside than as a pure defensive end. And that's when you're a 5 tech as a 34, you're not quite a pure defensive end. You're not rushing, from the 9 spot, from outside the tackle. And Tershawn Wharton might be a guy who can do that as well. So I think they've got the personnel to do that if they want. But I think 34 versus 43 is not the determining factor in terms of whether or not you prefer a defensive coordinator. And I don't think Spag's job is in much jeopardy, frankly. They definitely knew this was a rebuild year on the defense. They knew it was a reset year. And I think some of it, maybe they have a meltdown in the playoffs. That might lead to something, but I don't think that there's much of a chance that they're going to move on this offseason. Max Galloway says, I would love to know where this year's Chiefs rank among teams with the best records with the worst turnover differential. I cannot remember a team overcoming turnover so frequently. You know what? I don't know the answer to that. I do know that they've got a poor turnover differential, and to be 13-3, I'm going to take a drink for emphasis. 13-3. That's a lot of games to win when you're losing the turnover battle. And I don't know where that would rank all time. There's not a lot of teams that win 13 games. For starters, obviously this is the first year with 17 games in the season. But they really have. Last year when they had all those turnovers, they were losing games. I'm getting text messages during a recording, which is always fun because I never know who it might be. So I actually have to check it just to be sure it's not an emergency. Oh, good, it's not. So that's the day job. You always have to check your phone just in case, because you never know when it's a deputy or a social worker saying, we need help. Anyway, so it says something about the Chiefs that they have the ability to overcome those mistakes. It also says something that they make those mistakes, and that's not just turnovers. That's penalties. That's unforced errors. Inaccurate throws or drop passes or fumbles, which is a turnover. Untimely penalties. If they can clean that up by half, I don't expect them to clean it up all the way. If they can clean that up by half, they're a really, 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 really tough out for even a great team to beat. Will they? I don't know. It's what got them kicked out of the playoffs last year. It was a hats off to the Bengals for beating them. The Bengals took advantage. They stayed calm. They made a great comeback. But the Chiefs shot themselves in the foot repeatedly in that game. And that's really – and that's often what you see with really good teams when they play. The team that beats itself less is the team that's going to come out and win. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects them moving forward. Curl Scouts 69. This is the problem with reading Twitter usernames. Do you think the Chiefs, that's Curl, not girl, by the way. I think that's an important distinction to make there with the rest of that name. Do you think the Chiefs should forfeit the number 1 seed for the Bills? I don't, and I don't think the Bills would want them to. There's no right answer to what to do. Because on one hand, if the Chiefs, forfeit the number 1 seed, and again, with the necessary caveat of now we're talking about the practical implications of this stuff, right? What do you do? If the Bills and the Bengals both choose not to, and I think from what the Bengals players have said, they're leaving that entirely up to the Bills. And really what I should do is keep an eye on Twitter even as I record, because one never knows when the announcement's going to come as to exactly what they're going to do. If the Bills choose not to replay the game, which I would get, and I would get why the NFL might not necessarily want that with all the moving parts, because there's a lot of moving parts there. You can say we'll just move the games, but the reality is you have a lot of different businesses that are doing a lot of different things, and employed in those businesses are people. And there's just a lot of moving parts when you try to move around, multi-billion-dollar events. Or the events themselves are multi-million dollars. You combine them all, it's probably $1 billion or so. And the reality is that's hard to do. And so I'm guessing that's the direction the NFL would lean, but it's hard to say. I think for the Bills and the Bengals, you have to understand, it's an unfortunate thing. There's no one answer that will really work for everyone. There's no answer that will be fair for everyone. The only way to do that would really be, like, for the most fair answer in terms of record and everything, would be to let them finish the game at some point and try to move everything else. But if the Bills don't want to do that, and again, very understandable if they wouldn't, and then it becomes, okay, what do you do with it? You can't give the Bills a win. They were losing the game. The Bengals were on their way to scoring. It was real early. We have no idea what might have happened. But the Bengals, I think their win percentage was at their likelihood of winning was like at 57%. So you can't give it to the Bills. You obviously can't give it to the Bengals either. And a draw then necessarily it gives the Chiefs an advantage on a game that they didn't play. However, the Chiefs giving away that advantage would essentially penalize them for winning 13 games and putting themselves in a position to be right in contention with the number one seed. And so there's really no fair answer for everyone. And so what I would say would be the Chiefs, they have the record they have. They'd go out there, try to win. And that's another thing. They've got a tough division game. The Raiders have at times played them very tough over the last few years. They still have to win that in order to get the number one seed. And to me, it would be another thing maybe if the Chiefs have had kind of a crummy season. But if you go 14-3, I think you've beaten the teams that are in front of you. Yeah, the Bills and the Bengals both beat them, but the Bills and the Bengals both lost to teams that they shouldn't have lost to. And so, who deserves what? That's a long and complicated conversation that I would just say there's no fair answer to any team other than to postpone everything and let them play it out. Which, of course, for the Bills, there's risk there because they could risk the number 2 seed as well. For the Bengals, there's risk there. Sort of in less sense, they could potentially lose the AFC North as opposed to get an automatic win there. So there's benefits to both of those teams to just letting it ride as well. So that's my long road to a short thought is none of it's going to necessarily be fair. I think what the Chiefs need to do, they go out there, they see if they can beat the Raiders. If that earns them the 1 seed, fine. If it doesn't, fine. And that's just how that's going to be. The downside to that for Chiefs fans is you're going to be hearing about an illegitimate AFC championship. But at the end of the day, they still have to beat the teams in front of them to make it to the Super Bowl. And that's not an easy thing to do, regardless of what seed you have. David Banner asks, can Reed finally win Coach of the Year this year? He should be in contention, but I don't even hear a whisper about it from media, from anyone. And I include myself in media. When you've been doing it for as long as he has, you've been doing it at a high level like he has, people tend to forget. It's really unfortunate because I think the job he's done this year has been largely exemplary. They've turned over the offense, and they've still been a great offense. Some of that is Mahomes, but a lot of that's Reed too. And you'd think he would have a shot at it, but I don't think he'll even be in contention. Coach of the Year almost always goes to underachieving teams that weren't expected to be very good and then kind of skyrocketed. So I think you might see like Doug Peterson get it. John Wesley, hey, that's an awesome name. Little Nazarene humor for you. Says, I know you're not a doctor, but having rewatched the game, do you think Mahomes hurt his plant foot on that low hit? This is my number one concern for the team going into the playoffs. He looked fine on it afterwards, in my opinion. His footwork got wonky later in the game. It wasn't immediately following it. He threw some accurate passes afterward and looked fine. Now, maybe it got sore later on. I don't know. But I think he was moving around pretty well later in the game, so I'm not too worried about that. I think his footwork got away from him. He started getting some happy feet. I think that might have affected him mentally more than physically with the way he was moving or not moving in the pocket thereafter. Anthony Arvin asks, being a Chiefs fan since 1975-ish, never have been able to enjoy the fact that our team can choose how to play. Vanilla/German chocolate. With our youngsters improving defensively, do you feel the temp of the D will be in the playoffs? You demand ESP vets. I'm going to be honest, Anthony. I only understand part of that, but I appreciate you. So I would just say it chooses how to play. Whether or not, so I think whether or not what you mean is, whether or not they really get after it, whether or not they kind of lay back, they play a little more vanilla. I think that in terms of the defense, we're going to learn a little bit more against the Raiders. It's interesting. The Denver game last week was actually a really good microcosm of the season as a whole for the defense, where they started off really, really strong. And they had a lot of really strong moments, but when they were asked to do it consistently, there were some issues. And so I think the defense is just good enough with all the young guys to hold its own for a few drives as the offense sputters. But if that continues, that's going to be problematic. And that's kind of where you get with an average to slightly below average defense with some talent on it. You just read my mind, asks, oh, no pressure there on me. Would you prefer signing Juju to a big contract and trading up for a left tackle to replace Brown? Or do you sign Brown and trade up in the draft to replace Juju? I don't think you need to trade up to draft a wide receiver. I think there's good wide receivers in every class at this point, and that you can get late in the first round if you want to go there with a first-round pick. I think my preference, I think Juju Smith-Schuster is a better wide receiver than Orlando Brown is a tackle. I'm still hedging a little bit to see how things look the rest of the year. Orlando Brown has been playing better. But even if he closes out the season really strong, including the playoffs, including maybe a really strong Super Bowl showing, let's say, that his dream scenario comes true, you still have to deal with the fact that for over half the year, he did not play well. Now, maybe they know something in the building that I don't. Maybe it was injury. It's hard to say. But as of right now, it's tough for me to say that the Chiefs should really go top of the market money on a tackle that is up and down, even if that up and down leads to above average. Even if as you go up and down, up and down, up and down, you end up at an above average point, that's not top of the market. And it would just be like if Juju Smith-Schuster was asking for, in my opinion, Tyreek Hill money. That wouldn't make sense for the Chiefs to pay it. Foss4040 asks, what are your thoughts on whether or not the players are ready to play mentally? I'm sure they are. The reality is, like I said, talking about everything, life tends to march on, and players, they've got jobs to do. I think they'll be ready to play, and it's just a tough situation overall, but I think they'll be ready to do it. Anthony Harvin again. ESQ Seth, I like that you begin with that. And so just through the mechanics of the defense, complaints of vanilla and loose hinder the performance of our youth on the big stage, even their recent success as of late. I don't think they play vanilla on defense. I think you see them mix up coverages pretty frequently in the number of blitz packages that Spags sends. I don't think they play super vanilla, and I think that might be part of the problem for the youngsters at times, is that there's a lot to take in a Spags defense. He has a lot of assignments. It's one reason he tends to favor veterans. Bert asks, could the Chiefs and Raiders agree to a no-contest game? Only solution I've come up with for competitive balance in the AFC would never happen. I agree that it would never happen. And I've already kind of covered that. A no-contest game doesn't necessarily result in a fair outcome for the Chiefs either, especially because, again, either the Bills or the Bengals were going to lose. And that was going to affect a lot of things. And we don't know what's going to happen, honestly, in Week 18. And that's part of the problem is we don't know what's going to happen this next week. Maybe the Bills lose and it makes the whole thing moot. Maybe the Bengals lose and it makes a lot of it moot. Maybe the Chiefs lose and it makes the whole thing moot. I think people are placing a little too much emphasis on one game there, even though it was a very important game. But you also always have to remember that one of those teams had to lose. And so by a no contest, both teams in a small way benefit as well as cost. So there's a give and take there. Great Googly Moogly asks, after Juju, how bad is the wide receiver room? Not that bad. MVS and Watson shouldn't be around next year. Disagree on MVS. And the guys who should replace them more in Tony either can't see the field or are consistently injured. Can Kansas City win the Super Bowl with only 2 wide receivers, Juju and McColl? I guess I disagree with a lot of the framing of that question, and that's a really easy thing to do, is to ask a question and then kind of try to set up parameters within to live in that question. And so I would just say it's kind of like a loaded question a little bit. And I would just say that MVS is an NFL caliber number 3 wide receiver who's a good deep threat. He belongs on the roster, barring overpaying. Watson, he's been up and down. He's had some frustrating moments. He's a guy that's your 5th receiver. They are giving him a ton of snaps because they don't trust the young guys like Sky Moore. And so I personally, I don't really put it on Sky Moore that he's not on the field. Whenever he gets the ball, generally speaking, I've liked what I've seen. He dropped one that he should have had against the Broncos, which was rare for him this year. That said, it was also a really poor throw by Mahomes that he had to contort and bend back and slow down. Now, should he have still hauled it in? Probably. But is it one that most receivers would drop? Probably. So there's some tough stuff there. With Tony, you do hit the nail on the head that it's going to 100% depend on whether he can stay healthy. I'm willing to see how the year finishes on that before I really draw any conclusions about it. And as far as can they win the Super Bowl this year? 100%. Not 100% guarantee they will. 100% they can. What is that? 70% of the time it works every time. Chiefs Calculus asks, why is Mahomes having these stretches of getting away from his mechanics and missing receivers when in 2018 he seemingly didn't have that issue? He 100% had that issue in 2018. As a guy who charted every snap, he's actually been more consistently accurate this year than he was in 2018. And we'll see what the final numbers look like, but he 100% had that happen in 2018. And I think we forget now because we remember the ends of games. Take, for example, an easy example would be the Patriots, but everyone knows kind of what happened in those games. But another easy example would be that insane comeback against the Ravens. One of the reasons they needed that insane comeback is because Mahomes struggled for a lot of the day against their kind of simulated pressures, against them showing everyone at the line of scrimmage, then backing guys off, something the Patriots had done that he just wasn't quite ready for at that point. That was when blitzing Mahomes was kind of the best way to get to him. And one of the ways he's improved as a quarterback is that he reads those a lot better now, and he finds the hot route a lot more often. And so I think people are forgetting that he went through those stretches then too. This year, I think the Denver game and a few other games, you'll see some stretches. And I just think that our memory of games tends to be a little bit different than how the games themselves played out, because he did have stretches like that in 2018. It's just the Chiefs were playing kind of a system that people weren't ready for. People weren't ready for Mahomes. They hadn't really discovered a lot of his weaknesses yet. All right, we just got time for a couple more because we've gone longer than I already meant to. Joe Johnson asked with Tony and Casey next year, does that mean McColl is gone, or is there a possibility they could be on the field at the same time? It seems their skill set is so similar. I'd be surprised if Hardman were back next year, unless the market isn't quite what he's hoping for. And he comes back on a 1-year deal, kind of like DeMarcus Robinson did the 1 year, but I doubt it. They do have some overlap in their role with the team, and that, you can only have so many niche players. And Tony, of the two, has shown a lot more potential to do more than just that niche. The Varmint asks, when will Niang be back as starting right tackle? Not in 2022 or 23 now, I guess, barring an injury. And I don't know where he's at in terms of health, but I mean, he's been to where he could have played and he hasn't. So that's been a definite choice. Z Anderson asks, Patrick Mahomes' charts are insane. That being said, what are your thoughts on a division investigating UFOs within your government? Unsurprising. Are Willie Gay and Nick Bolton going to be a great linebacker tandem for years to come, or the greatest linebacker tandem? Another loaded question. No, I'm just kidding. I think it's a good one to close on. The defense is supposed to be built around the skill sets of Bolton and Gay. The problem is, well, right now, one thing is they've got Harris taking some of Gay's snaps, and consistently the defensive staff has shown a lack of trust in Willie Gay Jr., which drives me nuts. My position is I think he's the best linebacker on the team. I think he's got the most varied skill set. I think he's very good against the run. I think he's good against the pass. So, and that's not taking anything away from Nick Bolton. I just think Willie Gay Jr. is more varied. I think that you've got a specific skill set with Nick Bolton that it's the idea of him as, Anthony Hitchens plus. He can be better against the run, and he is, as well as not being quite as much of a liability against the pass, That part remains to be seen, depending on how they align him. So there's kind of a give and take there. The idea is, though, that you can build a defense around them. Wow, we've reached almost half an hour. Ryan is going to kill me, but that's perfectly fine. It's not the first time I've upset Ryan. I appreciate your questions. I appreciate you guys being willing to talk with me through kind of a goofy time in the NFL. And hopefully next week we'll be able to get right back to it, talk more Chiefs. Again, remember to like, subscribe, do all those things, and keep in mind for everything. Oh, hey, Happy New Year. And it really is a great week to be a Chiefs fan.